Hi, everybody. I'm George, and this is the Best Little Horror House in Philly, the show where we talk about the best horror movie ever made, according to our guest, at least. And today's guest is an exciting one. I'm constantly learning about great-sounding old Hollywood and international cinema from this guy. He's the #1 Pedro Almodovar fan and a host for It Pod to Be You, Queer and Now, and M Night Frights. Please welcome Manish Mathur. How's it going, dude?
Hey, doing well. How are you?
Doing really well over here, too. Like I said, you are a font of knowledge for me to constantly be learning about some really great classics, so I'm really stoked to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and that's so kind. I learned so much from your podcast, so it's
Oh, wow.
I'm really excited to be here.
Mutual Admiration Society, I suppose.
Yeah, right.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with horror?
Yeah, actually, I wasn't really into horror when I was little, or even in high school. I think in college I got into Hitchcock, and so I watched stuff like Psycho and The Birds and Frenzy. And it really wasn't until like 2015 that I got into horror, because what happened is that I started writing for this website called Horror Film Central, and somehow they hired me to write horror movie reviews for them, and I think I might probably lied about how much I liked horror movies just because I wanted to work for them. So I was there for about a year, and they would have me go out and watch horror movies for them every week or review older ones if there wasn't anything. So I did that, and it was certainly a lot of fun. So that's how I got into it, and yeah, it's so I won't say that I'm a major horror fan. I mean, I do enjoy the movies a lot, but I don't have Shudder. I'm not seeking out every little thing. But when there's something really kind of cool and interesting out, I'll definitely go check it out.
Yeah, I think that this is a really great perspective to bring onto the show, because so frequently we're talking to people who have really immersed themselves in horror. And to me, a big part of what makes something the best is its accessibility. The kind of thing that, crosses over.
Yeah.
That's a huge component of what might make something the best to me. And hearing someone who is interested in horror, who likes it but doesn't see every single movie that comes out, hearing what they view as the best and what sticks out to them is hugely important, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think what I like about horror is kind of what I like about musicals and melodrama and film noir, and that it's very classically cinematic. It depends a lot on the camera, the mise-en-scène, the editing, the music, the performances. All those things have to be firing on all cylinders for it to be effective.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what really stands out for the genre. And I think that's why I like musicals, that you need everything to be working together. And it's an experience you can really only have in a movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess on TV too, whatever. But like in a movie for sure, I know. But it's so inherently cinematic.
Definitely. Now, we're not talking about another M. Night movie today, but I would be totally remiss if I did not chat with you about his work. So I'm curious to hear about your enjoyment about his work specifically, what draws you to him enough to make a whole pod about his filmography, and what's the very best M. Night movie ever made.
Well, yeah, I love M. Night. Part of that is that he's like the most famous South Asian filmmaker out there, at least that's working in Hollywood, I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I really admire him because he really created this career out of nothing.
Yeah.
He has no contacts in the industry. He just made it on his own. And not only that, but he's become a household name. He's created really classic, iconic movies that really have resonate to this day. I just listened to your episode on The Village, and it was really, really fun to listen to that and to hear that appreciation. So for me, I think he's one of those guys that really studied the Spielbergs and the Hitchcock and the Kubricks, and he has that classical film knowledge, but he kind of makes it his own weird, crazy thing. And he's one of the few filmmakers that is truly original and truly beholden to his own vision. I admire him a lot because he, especially in the last decade or so, has been self-funding his own movies, and to me, that is for him to take that kind of chance on himself and to say, well, look, this is my vision, and I want to make sure that I have complete control over it, so I'm just going to put in all the funding myself and kind of use funds from previous movies to make new ones. And he's out of the Hollywood scene. He lives in Philadelphia. He's your hometown hero.
Hell yeah.
There's just a lot to admire. And, he had his whole decade where he was kind of not really making movies that anyone really liked, but to see him bounce back from that, with the Blumhouse people. So, I love The Sixth Sense and Unbreakable and Split, but I think for me, my favorite is The Visit.
Wow.
I don't know. It's just, that's his comeback movie. That's, it's just kind of like this like weird 90-minute like horror comedy fake documentary with like these two kind of cute but annoying kids and these like terrifying grandparents and Catherine Hahn doing some amazing work in like 8 scenes. So I think The Sixth Sense is probably still his masterpiece. I mean, I'm a big fan of Old as well.
Yeah.
I think Old is really just like stunning to look. I mean, he really pushes his filmmaking so forward with that movie.
Oh yeah.
But I have a soft spot for The Visit. I think it's a really cute movie in this like kind of like weird, funny way. Really scary, I think, and really emotional too. So yeah, I'm gonna put out a flyer for The Visit, just because I feel like people don't talk about it enough.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a watershed moment in his career, you know, the sort of revival of M. Night where people got back on his side. And I think that that's great. I'm glad that people are starting to come back on his side because I also really admire M. Night. I think the self-funding thing is really fantastic. But particularly what I admire about him is the way he really puts himself into the work.
Yeah.
Every single movie feels like it could not have come from anybody else. I think that he really wears his heart on his sleeve. I think that he is a huge romantic. You know, you see it time and time again in his movies.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that he didn't let that vision and that passion get beat out of him,
yeah.
You know, with all of, like you said, basically like a decade where everybody was just shitting on his work. It's incredible to me that he kept his head up, that he believed in himself and what he was doing in such a great way. And he should have, and I like even a lot of the ones that people don't like. I watched Lady in the Water and had a wonderful time with it. So there you go. M. Night fans unite. We're here.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he just seems like a genuinely good guy. You know, there aren't that many directors out there that, are so visionary and so specific that actually seem like nice people.
Yeah.
And, I don't... throughout the whole, like, Me Too thing a couple of years ago, I was always kind of afraid that someone would kind of bring a story about M. Night being, like, toxic on set or something. I have not heard anything like that. So, all around seems like a nice guy.
My buddy Craig has worked on a few of his shoots here in Philadelphia and has had nothing but glowing things to say about him. So,
yeah,
really great to hear.
I believe it.
Yeah. Returning to horror at large, is there a favorite subgenre, something that does tend to stick out at you as something that you tend to go back to and time again as a more likely favorite?
Yeah, in terms of subgenre, I really love a gothic ghost story, as evidenced by the movie that I picked. Get me like a frail woman running around a big house, with like ghosts kind of running around or some kind of supernatural thing. I love that, especially when there's really good sound design there.
Crucial.
Yeah, I really like that. I do enjoy a slasher movie, like the one that just came out, X, I thought was quite fantastic.
Yeah, very fun.
But I tend to be more into the whole, like, psychological stuff.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of the suggestions that I sent to you, like Eyes Wide Shut, Rosemary's Baby, Carrie, I think it's more like, I like that more. I think there's more power to, like, a really intense, slow build. Like a movie like Hereditary.
Yeah, watching someone degrade.
Yeah, which is just like, to me, that's scarier than seeing some guy in a mask. I mean, Halloween, Elm Street, I enjoy those, but I really like that, like, slow build, like that deterioration, and, like, especially my problem with jump scares is not so much inherently, but just the, like, having that build up, then, like, release catharsis. It kind of, whenever you watch a movie with a lot of jump scares with an audience, like, there's always that laugh after the jump scare happens, and, like, it doesn't really stick with you then, but, like, to me, like, having that really intense, like, slow build, to me, that unsettles me more, and, like, I'll have more nightmares about that. And
definitely.
Be, like, even a movie that's, like, not really explicitly a horror movie, if it has that kind of, like, atmospheric dread, to me, that's, like, more scary than even like monsters or, a subgenre that I'm kind of drawn to but terrified of is like demonic possession type movies.
Right.
Like, I don't know why I enjoy those, but they scare me to no end.
Wow.
Like Hereditary, I guess. I was thinking about I watched Hereditary recently because it reminded me a lot of The Innocents.
Yeah, I see that a lot, for sure.
So it was kind of on my mind. To me, that's like the scariest movie because like it's the slow build and it's a demon movie.
Definitely, yeah. And there's certainly a lot of that in today's movie, which is The Innocents from 1961. Really fantastic. Based on The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, a novella with 27 TV and screen adaptations. Although only 12 are a direct adaptation. The rest are just inspired by. Only 12, I say, in big air quotes. But this is the best of them all. Kick rocks, Bly Manor.
I enjoyed Bly Manor a lot, but it's a whole different thing.
Definitely. Now, The Turning of the Screw had been adapted by William Archibald into a stage play, and he turned that into the screenplay as well. But when Jack Clayton signed on to direct, fresh off the hit film Room at the Top, he didn't like Archibald's take on the supernatural events in the movie being real because he was smitten with an article he read from the 30s declaring the visions of the governess to be born of sexual frustration. One funny line, speaking of that, is that someone was saying that the true measure of success for The Turning of the Screw is by counting the number of articles attempting to decipher which is the correct answer.
Yeah, that's true.
So he brings in Truman Capote, who he'd met while assisting John Huston on Beat the Devil, for which Truman was the writer. And together they disregard the stage play, returning to the book and its ambiguity that it sort of has, and adding elements that muddy the water and create possible alternatives. And this is really where the movie shines, is this incredible ambiguity. Not only does it needs to present two ideas that are clear and counter to each other, but they also both need to be plausible for it to be effective. And this movie does such a great job of presenting evidence in both camps that constantly have you second-guessing yourself, second-guessing what's happening on screen. It's so remarkable, done so incredibly well. Now, Capote at this point was indeed a successful writer, with Breakfast at Tiffany's, among others, already under his belt, though his ascension would, of course, peak a few years later with the publishing of In Cold Blood in 1966. Interestingly, Breakfast at Tiffany's was adapted into the famous movie this very same year, 1961, though Capote was none too keen on the changes from the novella to the movie, but I digress. Deborah Kerr is our star of The Innocents, and man, what a star. She is so fantastic in this. Her physical performance carries the movie, really. She's just spectacular in this.
Were you familiar with her, or have you seen a lot of her movies?
I've seen The King and I, but that's it before this.
Yeah, when I saw this movie, I was a big fan of The King and I, as well as her movies like Black Narcissus.
Oh, I didn't even realize she's in that. I have seen Black Narcissus.
Yeah. So she's, and also Here to Eternity. Yeah, she's fabulous.
Yeah.
Really, really great performance from her.
Yeah, and she was already, like we said, a pretty famous actress at the time. She had met Clayton while he was second assistant director on George Bernard Shaw's Major Barbara in 1940. This guy was really getting the band back together.
Yeah.
And she does such a great job of getting us on the side of Mrs. Giddens at first, and I personally totally get swept up in her madness, although she said that she asked Clayton if the ghosts are really there, and he told her, make up your own mind. I think that's fun. I'm curious to know what she would think. What she is. It seems to me like she thinks that they're real.
I feel like she would almost have to, because I think as an actress you would have to really put yourself in that mindset that they are real, because otherwise it almost be too winking.
Right. Yeah, definitely. The costume department, I think, also does a really great job of sort of following along with her mental deterioration. She sort of becomes increasingly conservative, more severe clothing and everything. It's a really nice touch to the character.
Yeah.
And she's on screen for 95 of the movie's 99 minutes.
Not only that, but in these intense close-ups, that are very unforgiving, and and I think she was about 39, 40 when she made this.
Right.
But I watched this featurette on the Blu-ray about the cinematography of this movie and how they had to use CinemaScope because that was what the studio demanded for the time. And
right.
how just like that created this like weird like bloating look for, I mean, I don't know that much about cinematography like on that technical level, but it created this like weird effect on everyone's faces, and it adds to the unsettling nature of the film. But I could imagine if you're an actor being like, "Why do I look so bloated?"
Yeah, absolutely. And that CinemaScope, it's interesting because it was forced upon them. But Freddie Francis, he's the camera operator here. He's the director of photography, and he just knocks it out of the park. He was like, "Don't worry, Jack, I got this," and what he does with that is so great. He makes really great use of very deep focus is really remarkable. So many fantastic shots of someone like in the background watching someone in the foreground. And the CinemaScope, because there's all this negative space on the sides, there's like kind of a darkness that feels like it's eating in on the edge of the scene almost at all times. That really does a great job of sort of lending to the atmosphere.
That's especially true of the scenes with a lot of candlelight because the actors are kind of in this like circle of the candle, and then there's like so much there's all that dark space, and then you just don't know if you're seeing something or not, kind of, as you're saying, like encroaching into the frame. It's really scary.
Yeah. And Freddie's work is incredibly varied. He had done movies like Cape Fear and Dune as well. But the closest to his achievements here, for me, is The Elephant Man, which similarly makes really great use of like the shadows. And The Innocents really plays with shadows. It does a great job of using the depth of someone's face to really conjure emotion. You see the contours and everything in a really fantastic way. The children are played by Pamela Franklin as Flora in her debut, and Martin Stevens, who is also in 1960s Village of the Damned as Miles. They both do a really great job too. I am famously pretty critical of child actors, and I think that these two do a really good job of kind of waffling between precocious possessed person and a cute little kid just having a fun time.
Yeah, they're both very childlike, but very eerily adult-like. Especially Miles, like his flirtatious demeanor is very unnerving.
Definitely.
It feels very inappropriate and like sickening almost.
Yeah, it really adds a level of uncomfortableness to basically all of his interactions with Miss Gibbons, Giddens, excuse me. And we got to shout out the editor as well, Jim Clark, who does these amazing like mini montages, he called them. These long crossfades and superimposed images that make just truly unsettling moments. So many dissolves, beautiful dissolves.
Yeah, I'm a big dissolves guy. I always notice them. I love them. Again, it's a whole thing of like being cinematic. You can only do a dissolve in a movie. And, there's always that moment when the two images are perfectly half and half, and it's always unsettling. And I think the favorite dissolve sequence is her, like, nightmare that she has. Which
right.
Is very just, like, you don't know what's real. You don't know what's her imagination. I mean, just like with the whole movie, it's all these things are just really just crashing into each other, and it's quite disturbing.
Yeah, and there's as many as like 4 things happening at once, like being incorporated into the same frame. It's really just done incredibly well. There are also some similarities to fellow haunted house lady arriving there and discovering that her sexual repression makes her ripe for falling victim to them. The Haunting from 1963 by Robert Wise, and previous best horror movie ever made. So there you go. Check that out as well if this movie strikes your fancy, people out there. And the final scene, which certainly is interpreted in a few different ways, earned the movie an X certificate on its initial release in England, and an enduring reputation as a pretty disturbing depiction of repressed sexuality. A bunch of people weren't thrilled with the emphasis on the fact that it could go just like into psychosis as opposed to real ghosts, and so there was a bit of a mixed reaction when it first came out, but there was a large contingent that loved it as well, and that has only continued to grow as it has become, in fact, the best horror movie ever made. Let's talk about the actual movie. The opening itself is incredible. I don't think that I have ever seen as long of a black screen with just sound happening, even before the production cards and everything. And it's this friggin' creepy kid singing "Oh Willow Whaley" to you, and you know, finally a bird chirps as Deborah Kerr's name fades in on the black screen and the title, and you go, oh shit, this is actually, like, not just a card. This is something that's being filmed here. Again, sort of using the depth of darkness in this shadow. And two hands in prayer enter the frame with the sound of crying, and Deborah's face enters frame too, Miss Giddens, and she looks 1/4 profile into camera, and we hear her prayer here, where she says she wants to save some children, not destroy them, because she loves kids. And this, in my opinion, does a really great job of, you know, we don't know, we have nothing to base suspicion on her yet. I think this does a great job of sort of being like, oh, this is a nice lady. Like, she's in such stress about helping some kids that she's, you know, in prayer over here.
Yeah.
The specific kids referenced, though, are Miles and Flora, and they need someone to whom they can really belong, Miss Giddens says, because we then meet the handsome man she was governing for. And he's like, this is Michael Redgrave, by the way, who is really great in this one scene that he appears in. And he says, I'm too busy fucking my way across Europe to deal with small children.
Yeah, he's so good in the scene, and that, like, that one scene, I think, carries over the entire movie, right? Like, it's a shadow over the whole movie. And anytime there's this, like, any kind of stress in the film, it's always like, is this something we could bother the uncle about?
Yeah.
I mean, you need someone of his stature, right? I mean, he's, like, one of the greatest actors, of course, patriarch of this film family. And, yeah, you need someone of that kind of demeanor to, you know, really take it home.
Yeah, he's incredibly charming in this scene, and he tells her, I need you to take care of my niece and nephew in Bly. He repeats the line about how important it is to have affection, someone to whom they can belong and who can belong to them. And, you know, of course, this is something that people say about falling in love as well. So this appeals to the sort of romantic in Miss Giddens, who we also learn a bit about here. She's the daughter of a country parson, and this will be her first position as a governess. The uncle says Flora really liked the old governess, Miss Jessel, but she died, and it kind of fucked her up. Okay, no givebacks. They're your problem now. And she gazes at the hand that he just held. You know, she's clearly smitten, and I love the way this is communicated through suggestive blocking, despite the dialogue being about the children and about the job. You know, she's clearly much more focused on him. And again, that sort of physical performance from Deborah Kerr, I think, just really shines here. Beautiful countryside as she rides up to the gate, and in fact she gets out early so that she can walk and take it in, and we get these amazing shots of the house across the lake that, you know, take on a much more imposing feeling when you revisit and understand where it's going to go. But it's also interesting how the camera kind of peeks through the bushes and over trees, like we are also some kind of specter looming over here. There is a sound of someone saying Flora, though, and it is very creepy. And this is sort of the first bit of evidence that this is real, in my opinion, because she doesn't know anything about the ghosts yet, and no one else says that they heard Flora's name being called. So maybe she really heard a ghost over there. I don't know. But Miss Giddens does run into the aforementioned Flora, waiting for her with Rupert the tortoise. Classic Rupert. There's also a swan. Several swans, in fact. Flora says she didn't hear anyone calling her name, but everyone is stoked Miss Giddens is there, and so she brushes past it. And Miss Gross is the housekeeper who'd been chaperoning Flora in the interim, and she welcomes Miss Giddens in. This is the second bit of creepiness, and I think it kind of flies under the radar, but it really, like, spoke to me as creepy, is the touching a bunch of fresh-looking flowers, and a bunch of the petals, like, fall off in her hands. And Miss Gross says, oh, it happens all the time. And you're just like, oh, great, death pervades this house.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. There's so much, like, life in, like, flora, fauna in this house, but it's all very...
Literally flora.
Yeah, exactly, right. But there's something so, like, disturbing about it, where it's, like, as you're saying, like, it's like the death of the petals, or really like kind of like scary insects or things like that are just kind of like creeping and crawling all over, and it's this idea of that death is just like there, like there's just like a presence there.
Right. And I also thought it was an interesting choice of words for them to describe Flora here as angelic. Already this sort of unattainable bar is being set for these children.
Yeah.
And the house is mostly locked up, but still quite beautiful. Miles is away at school, but returning soon, according to Flora, and the other residents are Anna and the cook. Miss Giddens inquires about the children's uncle, like we said, having found him quite charming, and Miss Gross says, "He always was popular, but what's good in being popular down here with the children and the pigeons and me?" Really funny line. She also says that Miss Jessel wasn't nearly as pretty as Miss Giddens, who smiles in delight at the compliment, though her back is turned. There's a lot of her really being susceptible to flattery in this movie. I think that based on her upbringing, she probably didn't get a lot of compliments from a stern country chaplain father, who was like, "You can't play games because I'm writing my sermons over here."
Yeah, that, and also she probably doesn't have a lot of like gentleman callers.
Sure, especially
so
if she's
like,
an older woman. At this time, working as a governess, certainly so. Now, something is amiss though, because Miss Gross says he had the devil's own eye about someone in response to "he seems to like them young and pretty," but she scrambles to cover it up and say that she was referring to the master of the house. There's nobody else. Nobody. Meanwhile, Miss Giddens describes how easily she gets carried away, and in fact, that's what happened in London. And one of the things that she said in the opening scene is that she's like, "Oh yeah, I have an imagination," and that's part of what appeals to her, or to the uncle about her, because only people with imagination can ever really understand the truth. And she's here talking about so she has an imagination. She's talking here about how she gets swept up in things easily. They're really laying the groundwork for the unreliable narration of it all.
Yeah.
Now, Flora, this kid, is revealing her freakness. She's like, "Rooms get bigger at night. I always look in the dark." You're just like, what are you doing, Flora? She also asks, after praying, "If I'm not good, and I might not be, what happens when you die?
Yeah.
Does God just leave you here to walk around?" Talking about a goddamn ghost.
It just makes you wonder, like, this poor girl has no friends, nothing to do.
Yeah.
Like, I'm surprised she isn't even crazier than she already seems.
Very good point. Yeah, she really is pretty much totally solo there. What's the point of being popular with just Miss Gross and the pigeons?
Yeah.
This repression element starts to come into play as well here. There's an animal cry out the window, and when Miss Giddens is like, "What the heck was that?" Flora goes, "Miss Gross says that we have to just pretend we don't hear it, and if we pretend hard enough, we won't imagine stuff anymore." That seems healthy. But sometimes one can't help imagining things, Miss Giddens says. Also interesting, again, like I said, because Miss Giddens specifically was asked if she had an imagination, and only those can understand the truth. So it's all really coming together there. Flora and Miss Giddens are sharing a room, and Flora creepily watches her sleep, then hums the song from the beginning out the window at a bunch of statues, and suddenly she smiles at something down there, which was genuinely like a really scary scene to me. When she just like smiles at something off screen, and you're like, uh-oh.
It's the kind of scene where you expect them to cut to what she's looking at,
Mm-hmm,
and they don't, and that just it makes you really... It's jarring that it kind of ends with that.
Yeah.
Style.
Yeah, really jarring. It totally baits you into your imagination running wild. The next day, Miss Giddens receives some letters, including one from Flora's uncle. She's very eager to read it, something that Flora points out as well, again, reinforcing her interest in him. And he's not coming to visit, though. He forwarded a letter from Miles's school, and Miles is, in fact, a little rascal, and he got kicked out. And Miss Giddens is curious how Flora knew that he was coming home, but Flora is completely engrossed in a spider eating a butterfly. Probably nothing symbolic there, right? She discusses it with Miss Gross instead. Miss Gross is kind of portrayed as a bit of a, like, country mouse type. She doesn't know how to read, and it feels very easy to understand how she could also get swept up in the hysteria of Miss Giddens. I think that she is really doing a lot to provide a foil for her in a really interesting way, especially as someone who's not directly antagonizing her.
Yeah, I think they both kind of represent opposite sides of kind of the situation, which is like Mrs. Gross is very much about like repressing things and like not talking about anything unpleasant. You know, she like won't hear anything negative about these kids.
Right.
And Miss Giddens is kind of like, we need to figure out the truth of like what's happening.
Yeah. There's also it's a great shot of them, just this like chained up statue between them. And these statues are really kind of an omnipresent thing. You know, they're constantly leering at them and in the background of shots and out of windows and everything. It's a really, really great touch to have them just everywhere. You know, it's no wonder she feels like she's being watched. This is also where Miss Giddens starts to worry that Miles is a corrupting influence, based on the letter describing him as an injury to others. That's pretty harsh for an 11-year-old. And Miss Gross says, "Miss Giddens, are you afraid he'll corrupt you?" Which certainly becomes an uncomfortable reminder as things do take that sort of precocious, flirtatious tone later on. But Miles arrives off the train, and he has brought her flowers, which does assuage her fears a bit, though they are also pretty wilted, so that death does extend to him as well. And he is a charmer, though. You know, I love the spin the camera does when he greets Mrs. Gross. Just a really nice thing that doesn't ever come back. I mean, it is an active camera, but nothing like this wild spin that happens. Miles seems to be more upset by their uncle than Flora. I love this derisive imitation he does of him as, "Don't bother me, I'm very busy." And he correctly identifies that their uncle feels he doesn't have time to care about them. And he says, it's sad when people don't have time for you. And you again, sort of understand that these kids have really been through a lot. You know, they're basically completely isolated. Both of their parents have died. They're living completely alone with this uncle who has actively said, I don't give a shit about them. It's not a fun situation to be in. He cries when Miss Giddens tries to ask him about school and gain his trust, but suddenly the wind blows out the candle and slams shut the window, and he's back to, "Don't worry, my dear." Again, very adult, as opposed to the crying child that was there mere moments ago. It cuts to a dewy flower, which, again, I'm sure there's no metaphorical implications there. And I love when Miss Giddens peeks past the lush roses to see this fucked up statue ripping two hands out of the ground and a beetle crawling from its mouth. It's shocking.
Yeah, it's really quite a bizarre setup to this house.
Yeah. Now, this is described in the screenplay as a spoiled Cupid, which I found very interesting. Obviously, that can be representative of the twisted love between Quint and Miss Jessel, but also, of course, of Miss Giddens' sexual frustration. Giddens sees someone atop the parapets, and up there on the tower, but the sun is in her eyes and she can't really see. And when she approaches, the person is gone, and a dove flies across the screen. There's a lot going on here. Obviously, a dove represents purity a lot of the time, but they also do some like fun surrealism here where the singing and basically all noise stops momentarily as she steps forward and then comes back in when she's shattered from her focus. Really spectacular stuff. She walks up the steps to the sound of buzzing bees, which, these steps are very Vertigo, speaking of Hitchcock. Yeah. And up there playing with the birds is Miles, who says that he's been there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, who knows. Again, playing with this ambiguity. And he didn't see anyone else, so she shakes it off, as well as the fact that the children both know she hasn't been sleeping well. And she's making all kinds of noises and stuff in her sleep. But back in the house, the children are both drawing. Funny classic kid thing where Flora is like, look, I can draw too. And you go, yes, dear, very nice vase and flowers. And she's like, no, it's a thunderstorm. This actually in and of itself is kind of an interesting comparison that she thought it was flowers, this beautiful and pure thing, but it's actually a thunderstorm, tempestuous and dark. Miles says that he wants to be a boy at Bly forever, which is interesting, but also I feel like kind of a reversal of what a lot of kids normally want. I feel like kids usually want to grow up very quickly. And it's interesting that for someone who has been forced to grow up very quickly, that he is instead seeking sort of a retreat to childhood here. They ask her about her childhood, which sounds pretty repressive as well. Her father, like I said, was always preparing the sermons and he needed quiet, but also they lived in a very tiny house with no real privacy. You know, she said that there was enough of them to play hide and seek. So if there's not a lot of privacy, it certainly feels like maybe what happened with Miles and Flora potentially walking in on people having sex might have happened to Miss Giddens here as well, and shaped sort of her sexual drive and dysfunction. Yes, good word. The kids, they say, great, we'll do this too. We'll play hide and seek before bed. But while seeking them, she sees a woman quickly glide behind a curtain. But she isn't able to investigate because the children call her name. And great shot here as well as she heads up the stairs. In the attic is a freak-ass clown bobblehead that I hate with every inch of my soul.
Oh my god, it was terrifying.
But also there is a music box that gets knocked over. Inside is it's called a glass. They say it looks kind of like a locket, but without the locket part. It's just like a photo in a glass thing, and it's cracked, which is of course also very indicative of what's going on and the impurity. But she gazes at that while the music plays, and later she'll describe this man as both very handsome and also obscene. You know, it's an interesting shot of her here just like staring at the picture. And she's startled out of this by Miles, who jumps out and puts her in a sick headlock, brother. She can't get out, and he won't let her go, despite her pleas that he's hurting her, until Flora comes in. And she said, well, first, yeah, okay, there's a lot going on. First of all, she says, wow, you found it. I guess Miss Gross had hid it up here. Okay, your turn to hide. So first of all, Miss Gross clearly is freaked out by what's going on, and instead of dealing with it, just put this music box up in the attic. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is that there is the abusive relationship between Miss Jessel and Quint is also sometimes theorized to be more akin to BDSM as opposed to strictly actual abuse. You know, she talks about how she was so in love with him still, and she would look like she desired the weight of his hand or whatever.
Yeah.
And this sort of putting her, like, feeling like they're both getting some enjoyment out of him putting her in this position, feels like it's sort of tied into that.
Yeah, it really sets up the central kind of question of the movie is that, like, are these kids being possessed to sort of reenact this relationship, such as, you know, whether it was abusive or BDSM. I don't know. I tend to kind of flip flop every time I watch this movie about kind of like what that relationship was like. And
yeah.
I think one of the great things about this movie is that we don't really see that, and I think that's sort of like one of the major differences between this and Bly Manor is that with Bly Manor being like I think those 8 episodes or 6 episodes,
something like that.
You know, you have that time to explore that, but I think not having that ambiguity really sells sort of this like unsettling, you know, uncertainty in the film.
Yeah,
and I think, you know, the scene with Miles, you know, kind of choking her or having her in that like wrestling headlock. It's really quite something because it really comes out of nowhere, right? Like he doesn't seem like a very violent child.
Yeah,
and I don't think he even really seems like he just knows what he's doing, right? It doesn't seem like it seems like when a kid like accidentally like, you know, hits you somewhere or is like choking you, it's like not even on purpose. It's just like they don't know their own strength, right?
Right. And of course, the final and most important question that this raises is, do these children know the rules of hide and seek, considering they both emerge unprompted?
Yeah, well, that's really the major ambiguity of the film, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't like hide and seek, and it's
Sucks.
because of situations like this. You know, like hide and seek is always scary.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I'm not a huge fan of hide and seek either, because the best thing that happens is you just sit by yourself for a long time.
Right. Right.
That sucks. Fuck that. Miss Giddens, it's her turn to hide now, though, and so she hides behind a curtain. First of all, it's kind of funny to just imagine trying to hide in that giant-ass hoop dress that she's wearing.
Right, right.
Her options are limited. But second, she's replicating what we just saw the other woman do by kind of passing and gliding behind this curtain to hide. And thirdly, there's another statue over her shoulder, again, always watching on and looking in pain. But it's not just a statue back there, because she looks over her shoulder once again, and it's a face, the same one from the cracked glass, a scary one, and she's sure it's the same man from the tower, and it slowly draws back into the darkness. And this is so effective to me. This face drawing back into the darkness is done so well, and obviously the ambiguity of, we just saw a statue over her shoulder. Is it possible that she's seeing that and imagining it being the face of this man that she just saw? I think that pretty much everything that's happening in this scene is 1000% working for me.
Yeah. The casting of that actor is really on point because he looks handsome and obscene. Like, I don't know what that means, but when I see that guy, I'm like, okay, that guy's handsome and he's obscene.
Yeah. Oh man, it's like what's that guy who he played the voice of Black Phillip in The Witch, and he is just so handsome, but you're also like, that guy was the devil.
Yeah, right. I don't know if you saw this in your research, but they had that actor on like he was like gliding, right? Like he wasn't walking, he was like on something that with wheels, and I thought that was really effective because it feels very otherworldly, you know. It feels
it's so smooth.
It feels like it's so smooth, and again, like this is like they could have done it where he just like pops into the frame, but the fact that he like fades in and out, it's so scary because it's like it reminds me of It Follows, because it's just that idea of just like it's coming, like it's not that it's gonna pop out, but that like it's coming, it's there. And you're just like frozen because you're seeing something. It's like, because you can see it clear as day, it's like almost scarier.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's there. It's the same thing with the statues, right? It's like it's a presence. It's this idea that like you're actually on their turf.
Yeah, I love that they feel like they can take their time. Like that's very scary.
Right.
She discusses this with Mrs. Gross, who says it's the uncle's valet, Peter Quint. But don't you see, he's dead! And the children laugh from upstairs while the music box plays. Very classic creepy children stuff. It's very fun. And one thing to mention is that the children already kind of seem to be master manipulators. Where, first of all, it feels like maybe it runs in the family a little bit, because we certainly see the uncle playing this up to his advantage to get Miss Giddens to take the position. But also, like I said, they've had to grow up quickly, and so we've seen them get out of talking about anything that they don't want to talk about. Miles is a flatterer, and here in the here in the classroom, we see Flora begging, as Miles puts it, first for attention, then for affection. She says that she's distressed, that she can't go out to the garden, and so Miss Giddens lets them go pretend to have a costume party instead. Put it out of your mind. Pretend it was just a dream, says Mrs. Gross, while Miss Giddens laments the ghost. And it cracks me up when Giddens is like, how could I have described him so accurately? And Gross is like, you just told me that you saw a picture of him.
But again, it's that unreliable narrator, right? It's,
yeah.
You know, because she saw the picture and then she saw him, it puts it in our mind that she's not seeing what she thinks she's seeing.
Definitely. And Quint, it turns out, died drunk and falling on the icy stairs. And Miles was the one who found him, and of course that was his father figure, she reveals, because he was the masculine presence around the house. And Gross says that it had to be an accident, even though Quint had made some enemies. Ooh. The kids, though, arrive with the music box again and quite dressed up in a crown and a sewing needle pad. But Miles recites this poem about loneliness after someone dies, and then the guy is a damn ghost chasing the POV. It's a really fun, spooky poem, but there's also a longing in it, a desire for reunion at any cost, even if they're a ghost, which is reflective of how the children feel about their parents, about Quint and Jessel, who replaced their parents. I think that it's a really well done moment.
Yeah.
Giddens is like, oh my God, Miles knows. And then Flora leans in, the picture of devious innocence, and says, knows what, dear? The children acting grown up pretty much amuses me every single time.
Yeah, especially when they call people like dear.
Yeah.
You know, it's very amusing. That's another really great dissolve too. It's like on her question, and not showing how they answer that is really effective.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Gross says that Quint was unstoppable in his rule of the house, and she implies that he was seeing Miss Jessel, who changed when he got there. Flora reveals a bit more of her psychopathy the next day, though, as she almost drowns Rupert in the lake. That was a fucked up scene. And she also tells Giddens that Miles once saw a hand at the bottom of the lake. She starts humming and is hummed back at by a lady out there in the reeds, but the lady vanishes when Giddens asks who the heck that is, and Flora just stares at her. Again, this ambiguity, questioning whether Flora is staring at her like that because she's like, haha, crazy that there was a ghost there, right? Or staring at her like, what the fuck are you talking about? There was nothing there, I was just humming.
These kids have a really amazing ability to have completely blank expressions like that.
Yeah.
Where you can't really tell what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Or they just kind of look at you. Yeah, cherubic. And they kind of have that, like, angelic / devilish smile. And you're kind of like, okay, but you're not giving me anything.
Gross finds Giddens shook as hell and tries to play it off again. But Giddens is like, there are two of these abominations. And really great moment because, of course, this could be talking about the two spirits, or it could be talking about the two children. Really fun moment. And she says, I know that was Miss Jessel there in black. She thinks the kids are in on it. Maybe it's just a game to them, but it's secretive and whispery and indecent. Gross does believe her, but doesn't know how to help. So Giddens says, what do they want? And this is where we get some more of the backstory here. She says Jessel was in love with Quint, a fever that burns out the body and left her desperate for his affection despite his cruelty. She also says that they frigged like rabbits, using the empty rooms like they were the dark woods, and didn't care who saw. Now this, first of all, the uncle's saying that what he was doing is not the type of amusement one shares with children, definitely takes on a new hue here. But additionally, this description of the house as the dark woods, I think is really powerful and does sort of capture what Giddens has been feeling this whole time. This unfamiliar environment, the looming faces, the darkness. It's a really powerful moment. But when Quint died, Jessel mourned so hard that she died of a broken heart. Gross says, too many whispers in this house. Giddens has truly gone off the rails now, and she's like, I know that Quint corrupted Miles, and they've been deceiving us, before being like, all right, time to go hear their prayers. This sort of switching back and forth that she does as well is interesting, the same way that the children switching back and forth is interesting. This is where we get that amazing dream sequence. Things fade in and out. It looks really fantastic. The children whisper to each other about how they've got a secret, and they giggle and run off. And Rupert is there with a sick flower crown, and a few other great images, including Jessel and Flora dancing with Quint and Miles entering the room. And then a bunch more of those innocent and pure doves flying around. It's really funny to think back, 30 minutes ago, when Giddens was like, these kids are angels and I love them. And then have it be reflected by this too. They are calculating liars, corrupted by ghosts, constantly scheming to bring them closer and the downfall of the house.
I know. She really flip-flopped there.
It's like they're 11.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah, we can also see her sexual repression having turned her on them. They saw sex at a young age and thus were tainted. They're no longer the innocents.
Yeah.
She wants to get the uncle to come back, but says, I know he'll think this is just some trick to get him to notice me, which is another moment where you're like, no one suggested that. So her own sort of dysfunctionality emerging here, telling on herself, so to speak. And Gross finally reveals that Jessel drowned herself in the lake, and Giddens notices Flora leaving flowers for Jessel too. And the Christian upbringing that she has, of course, suicide would be looked at as very sinful, very taboo. And so that only makes it even worse that this person is a corrupting influence on Flora, that she might drag her down that same sinful path. And so Giddens decides that she can't leave, she won't leave, because Jessel was in the classroom and spoke to her after Giddens heard her crying and found her in the classroom, leaving a tear on the chalkboard. Now, obviously, this could have been anything, a small leak, considering how much rain we've been getting in the movie.
Right.
Her own tear, based on how fucked up her own sleeping has been and what's been going on with her emotionally. But she's convinced that the children are possessed by the two ghosts who are using them to be together, and she has to get Miles and Flora to admit it so Quint and Jessel can be cast out. But until then, they can't let the kids out of their sight. And it's so funny to me that she's just like, I know how to fix this. They just have to admit that it's happening.
She really is jumping to a conclusion, and I think it's even an assumption from her that these... Okay, like, let's say the ghosts are real, and they're trying to possess the kids. I think it's really an assumption to even say, like, they're trying to possess it so they can, like, continue their relationship beyond the grave.
Yeah, maybe they just want to live forever.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, there's something about this house that really unlocked her repression, and maybe it's this idea of, like, this house being this, like, sex castle where apparently people are doing it all over.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of this, like, jealousy or this sort of, like, longing for that kind of, like, sexual expression.
Yeah,
has
liberation.
really been, like, unlocked. Yeah, liberation, unlocked. And now, but her reaction is to exorcise it out. You know, it's quite fascinating, I think.
Yeah, I think, again, this kind of ties into her Christian upbringing, where the idea of confession being the first step to forgiveness sort of stuff, I think is certainly overflowing into this view of the children here. Mm-hmm. That night, she is reading the Bible by the fire, and perfect place to doze off and imagine hearing ghosts have sex, in my opinion. But she gets up, or maybe she gets up, and she continues to hear Quint and Jessel, who are being walked in on by the children. And this just looks so amazing as she's wandering this giant empty house, like pulling on doors that won't open and stuff. Really, first of all, feeling frustrated, obviously. Yeah. But then also, I think it just, like, aesthetically looks fantastic.
This is the scariest scene in the movie for me. You know, the excellent use of sound design and the candles and the camera work, and how it's just, you just really don't know where you're going. And it ends on that incredible, or one of the ending parts is, like, that close-up of that really scary statue.
Yeah.
The scream. And I think I mentioned this to you when we were first chatting. Like, I can't fall asleep without the TV on, and partly because of this movie. Because, like, when I first saw this movie, I was living in an apartment building that was really creaky, and you could hear everything in the hallways. And not even on my floor, but the floor above me. Mm-hmm. And so I watched this movie, and I'm trying to sleep, and I'm hearing people walking and talking, and I'm like, I'm so scared. And I remember I watched Family Guy to help me fall asleep, because I was like, okay, this is a comedy, you know, it's fine, I'll live. And then I just created that habit, and now it's like I can't sleep when it's too quiet, because, like, if there's any kind of noise, I think about this movie, and I get freaked out, and I need to, like, it's just like, when it's too quiet, it freaks me out. You know?
Definitely. It's very freaky. I think that it does a really great job of putting you in her shoes in this moment and creating that empathetic fear. You know, when she gets overwhelmed and scared by what's going on, we're like, yeah, get the fuck out of there, lady.
And even some of the dialogue that she hears is it's a little unsettling. You know, like the repeated "love me."
Yeah.
You know, kind of ties back into that, like, abusive toxic relationship, or
Yeah.
the children are watching and all the laughing, where first it's like the children are watching, we need to stop, then it's like the children are watching and we're laughing.
Yeah.
I would love to just like watch that scene and just really try to hear all the different things that are being said and all the different intonations and the repetitions. And again, it's like, we don't know if she's imagining this or if this is actually like the ghost just like kind of taunting her.
Right.
In a way.
Yeah. It looks great. It sounds great. The candles are burning low, like you said. But when she flees to her own room, she discovers Flora isn't in bed. She's staring out the window, watching Miles walk in the garden. And he looks above her at the parapet, so she looks too, but doesn't see anything. And Flora just smirks at her doll while Giddens continues to degrade here. Miles, though, tells her that he was acting out for attention, and she finds a dead dove under his pillow with a snapped neck. And he says, "Oh yeah, that's a bummer, huh? Okay, time for a smooch." And he plants one right on her lips, to her shock and frazzlement. And it's kind of a shock for me, too. And it makes me kind of wonder not only if they were seeing these two, the couple have sex together, but also maybe if there was some kind of molestation happening from Quint to Miles here, if this is what he thinks an appropriate and normal way for children and adults to act together is.
Yeah.
It's really, it just really gets under your skin. The next day, Giddens goes to write the letter to the uncle as promised. Miles is unconcerned with her reporting his behavior, saying, "Be sure to give him my love," which is also very funny. And there's another statue looming outside the window, and he's playing the song from the music box that Flora sings. Suddenly, and speaking of Flora, she has vanished. This is the first appearance of a very cute cat that Gross is petting. I don't know why they have been holding out on us like this. But they run out to the lake, and Flora has taken the boat. All alone, that child? But she's not alone, and at such time, she's not a child. And it's like, wow, she's really full in on this theory here. In the heat of the moment, Gross is just like, okay, fine, let's go. But it is like that's a weird thing to say to someone.
Yeah.
Flora is dancing under a gazebo kind of thing that we've seen a few times here. And the wide-eyed Giddens approaching from the trees is so great looking. She really looks crazed. And she stares across the water and sees Jessel. It starts to pour. And Giddens confronts Flora, shaking this tiny child, yelling at her, demanding she admit that she can see the ghost.
Yeah.
This is another really great scene where it's like, oh, we've kind of crossed another threshold of where it's like, oh, she's like getting really aggressive with them now. This fear that she has is really getting to her. Again, questioning that manipulation, though, because Flora says, "Oh, I'm frightened," and starts to cry just as Miss Gross approaches. Crying is generous, though, because this is more of a scream. And indeed, it starts to sound like the crying of an animal that was mentioned at the beginning of the movie, while Jessel continues to stare at Giddens. Just very great stuff. Also, I did have to turn down the volume at this point.
Oh my god, it's obnoxious.
She heads back to the house, sitting by the fire, and is joined by Miles, who again sort of imitates her, pretends to be adult. He's undisturbed by the continued screams, however, and apparently it has become filth, as described by Gross. She's swearing and saying all kinds of nasty stuff. Gross, however, says that she didn't see Jessel either, and Giddens freaks out because, of course, she accuses Gross of being afraid when she got there because she felt that the two weren't really dead, and this could be interpreted as simply their memories lingered and cast a pallor over the house, and she was scared, didn't feel they were really dead, or she felt like they were actual ghosts. It's kind of interpreted both ways. I think that this is where this sort of ambiguity of Gross's reaction really starts to rise, and I think it's really great, this sort of like, how far is she willing to go along with this idea that there are ghosts here? And as she starts to push back on it, the language that's used is like just vague enough to really be like, is she faking it and repressing it again? Just great stuff. "All I want to do is save them," she says. So Gross has to take everyone away except Miles so Giddens can interrogate him. That seems like a bad idea. Gross warns her that waking a child from a nightmare can ultimately be worse, to be deprived suddenly and faced with shock. Hint, hint. But Giddens won't hear it and tells Gross to tell the uncle the truth, and so she hesitates and says, yes, miss. She's gonna go tell that uncle that this motherfucker is crazy. But wait until you see Miles again to judge me, says Miss Giddens. Really a powerful line at the end of the movie. Yeah. And so goes Gross with a giant slam of the door and a body can only judge themselves, which is sort of an interesting rebuttal there. And neither Flora nor Gross look back at Giddens as they depart. Truly they have moved beyond her. They're just trying to get away.
Yeah.
Giddens wanders the grounds. She's surrounded by dozens of these statues again. Truly, the ghosts are all that are there. These historical figures that are still present, even in the present. Still present in the present. Eventually, Miles does return though, and they're gonna have tea and talk like adults. Jolly nice.
The featurette that I watched on the cinematography, it was with John Bailey, who I believe is the president of the Academy and cinematographer. So he does a really cool breakdown of this scene and how it uses the wide frame to kind of have both of the actors on complete opposite sides of the frame and kind of keeping he mentions like the tea kettle is always in between them as like the center of the frame, and you have these two opposing forces. So I thought it was interesting because it's a kind of scene where you're not really sure if you notice cinematography, but Freddie Francis I think does a really incredible job of even these scenes having very like dynamic camera work for just dialogue.
Yeah, I think that having that something in the middle, splitting the two forces, has come up a few times. I pointed out the one with Giddens and Gross, where there's the statue and chains between them and everything.
Yeah.
And it really does even subconsciously separate the two people and draw them onto two different sides. I think it's really great. Miles has a really interesting dynamic where he is interested in being an adult in some ways, saying things like, oh, I feel quite the master of the house. I'm the man here and I'll protect you. But also, there are moments where he is childlike and innocent when he slaps the Jell-O. He runs off when she asks him if he's actually happy, and the interrogation begins in earnest after she pursues him into the garden. My father taught me to love people and help them, even if they refused my help, even if it hurt them sometimes. That sounds bad.
Yeah.
You see that she wants to save them from her path, perhaps, but the cycles of violence and cycles of abuse persist, and they cause their own ripples. And it's a very sad moment here where you see the hurt that was done to her. There's also a nice little moment of vagary where Miles confesses to taking the letter because he wanted to see what she said about them. And of course, them could be him and Flora, or them could be the ghosts.
Yeah.
She asks about the expulsion, and he says it's because I'm different, but eventually does admit to scaring the other boys because he cursed and hurt things, such as the dove, which we saw. And of course, this persists into Flora as well, as she almost murdered poor Rupert. And when she asks who taught him this behavior, he says, it just came into my head. You want me to admit it because you're scared, you're mad, and you're really just a hussy. And we were never fooled by you, he says. Funny word to call someone these days, a hussy. It made me laugh. But she sees Quint's face appear in the foggy, sweaty greenhouse glass, laughing along with Miles. And this is just such a perfect kind of encapsulation of what's going on here. This, like, is he actually there? Is it his influence? And she's just projecting. It's such a beautiful moment of it. Poor Rupert. Miles chucks him out the fucking window. This poor tortoise can't catch a break. He runs as well, and she chases him, and he falls in front of a statue, which, by the way, of course, this slipping is reminiscent of Quint as well in his final moments. And she says, say his name and it will all be over. He's dead, Miles insists, But she insists right back, saying he's here now and for the last time. So finally he believes her, and he looks around for him, then suddenly stares back at her, calls her the devil, and collapses. She lifts him up, saying, "Oh great, you're safe, you're free." But when she looks at his face, his eyes are actually open, and he's dead. It's a really intense moment, you know. It's funny when you're like, you like forget the story that this is based on, and I was like, oh.
yeah, right.
But she gives him sort of a farewell kiss, and then her head falls out of frame, and her hands come up in supplication again as the end credits appear. First of all, lots of reversals here, like when he smooched her before, and also put her in a headlock that hurt her and wouldn't stop until he was interrupted. She hurt him, but there was no one to interrupt them. And so he's fucking dead.
Yeah.
This kiss is interesting because, of course, there is the sort of culmination of the flirtation between the two of them that could be happening here. But it also kind of feels like a reverse Sleeping Beauty. You know, she kisses him farewell as he's now sleeping forever, preserved in innocence. There has also been, like I said, that feeling throughout that there was like an attraction there to his uncle, and that maybe by his being so precocious and advanced, that she's kind of like replacing the uncle with him. And it's just all fucking wild. Clayton recalled, I read this very funny quote. He said that Spiros Skouras, who was Fox's president at the time, called him every day for 2 solid weeks, begging him to change the ending, which I would not and did not do. I was like, fuck yeah, Jack. I think it's really great. I think that it's a really powerful ending. You know, when you think about her being like, wait until you see Miles again to judge me. And you think about like, well, what's next? Because it cuts here and it's such a pit in your stomach of like, no, I need to see what actually happens. This is such a great cliffhanger of the story to keep your imagination working.
Yeah.
I think it's so powerful, such a great way to sort of close off what's already been a fantastic story.
Yeah, I mean, the ending is so... Yeah, it's one of those endings where it leaves you with like a question mark or like a ellipsis, and you're just left to consider what happens. And I like to think that the beginning, like, when she's saying, I wanted to save the children, not destroy them. I like to think that was like from like what she says like right after he dies, like right after the movie ends. It's like, you know, it starts at the very end and then kind of goes back, just because like I can imagine she's trying to like rationalize to herself that like, you know, her intentions were noble and wanting to save them.
Yeah,
and she, you know, poor Flora. I mean, probably still screaming to this day. And you know, Miles is dead, and I think she's trying to like convince herself that like she did what she had to do in order to save them.
Definitely. And I also think that the sort of loop aspect of the film, where it definitely does feel like the beginning could be sort of also the end, does sort of reinforce that cycles of abuse thing that's been happening as well. Mm-hmm. And now, Manish, we've reached the point of the episode where we sum up why this is not just a good horror movie, but is in fact the best horror movie ever made. And I'm going to let you start.
You know, I love this movie for so many reasons. One, it's the camera work is so striking. Just the way that the wide angles are used, the way that close-ups are used, the lighting, the blocking, you know, of the camera and of the actors. Everything's so carefully designed to really kind of shake you to your core. You know, there really isn't a moment in this film that doesn't try to make you question your own sanity, you know, your own understanding of the story, you know, the characters. And I think the performances, you know, by Deborah Carr and the children and Mrs. Gross, of course, are so just captivating and really highlight this ambiguity. And I love this theme of this like sexual repression really coming up to the surface and, you know, either manifesting these spirits or causing some kind of like internal mental breakdown, you know. And also this idea of like, you hear kind of this like urban legend, right? She hears about this relationship between the Miss Jessel and Peter Quint, and she just like it gets lodged into her brain, right? And I think all of that is really really captured quite effectively by the filmmakers, and I think The Innocents. It's a really influential movie. Like I saw The Shining in it. I saw Hereditary, as I mentioned. I saw a little bit of like Halloween too, or Elm Street. It just like stories about these like women who are just trying to escape something and trying to do something, trying to like solve their fear.
I mean, It Follows as well.
Yeah, It Follows. Crimson Peak, of course, is a huge influence, or is influenced that movie in a huge way. And I really wanted to stick up for 1960s horror movies, because I feel like people who like horror movies kind of jump to the 70s and 80s, and I think the 60s are really potent. This movie, Repulsion, The Haunting, as you mentioned, Rosemary's Baby, Psycho, of course, The Birds, Village of the Damned. Like, I think these are really interesting movies that kind of bridge the gap between sort of the post-war euphoria of the 50s and sort of the new wave of the 70s. And Martin Scorsese calls this one of the best horror movies ever made, and who are we to disagree with him, right? He knows he knows better than anyone. So I'm really glad that this movie. I saw this movie in college, I think, for the first time, or a little bit after college. But I studied the book in college, and I'm so glad that this movie got a Criterion release, that it's out there. It was on Criterion Channel for a while. I'm sure it'll be back soon. So I'm really glad that it's getting an audience, because I think it's really influential. It holds up really well. I think, it's just so scary. I mean, I was watching it last night and I was scared. And I've seen this movie so many times. It gets under your skin because of that, like, the intimacy of it's a sort of empathetic horror where you're just so in this woman's brain, in her mindset, that you really can't feel anything but terrified as she's going through these ordeals and trying to kind of reestablish some kind of stability in this really like uncertain and unsettling, period of time that she's in.
Yeah, to me, this is the best horror movie ever made, because somewhere along the way, people decided that old horror movies just couldn't be scary.
Yeah.
And I truly don't know where this came from, because while it's true that maybe the gore isn't there and, maybe it doesn't have jump scares like people might be used to, but because of that, they're instead forced to make you actually uncomfortable.
Yeah.
and they really play with your emotions and your mind in a way that relying on jump scares simply cannot do. And I think that this is such a perfect representation of how that can be done effectively. It is gorgeous looking. We have gushed about the way this movie looks all over the place, but there are even things that I didn't even really get a chance to slot in anywhere, where like, yeah, it feels very intimate a lot of the times, in that there are a lot of close-ups, but also you'll notice that like Giddens like won't look at people. She like doesn't make a lot of eye contact with people. Yeah. And this idea of her always being like in the front of the frame and kind of like staring off into her own thing is just done so well. So many things that don't have attention drawn to them, but they just exist confidently in a way that really comes across and forces you to notice them without calling attention to it. The performance is outrageous. This lives and dies by Deborah Kerr, and thank God it lives, because she's just so good in it. I watched this movie twice, because I watched it while taking notes, and then I was like, this movie was so good that I just want to watch it again without taking notes, just a vibe check.
Yeah.
And I had even more fun with it the second time, going through, knowing exactly how things shake out and being able to look for all the little clues and all of the indications of her downfall. It's so great. Everything about this is great. It's so rare for an adaptation to exceed the source material, and in my opinion, this absolutely does it. It reinforces the ambiguity while also creating the scares that are present in the book, novella, whatever you want to call it. And the way it's just all put together here is unmatched. It's the best horror movie ever made. So there you go.
There you go.
Manish, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, man. This was an absolute blast. Please tell the people where they can listen to your shows as well, and anything else you want to plug.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I've been listening to your podcast since I think the pandemic started. That's when I discovered it. And It's been such a joy listening to you and all your guests talk about these amazing... I've discovered so many things. I've argued with you in my head when I didn't agree. But I learned a lot. Yeah,
Thank you.
It's really, really a great listen. Really glad to have it in my podcast, library rotation. You can find me on Twitter at Vertigay314. That's VERTIGAY 314. Also, my podcast, It Pod to Be You, is slowly coming back from hiatus. You can follow that at It Pod to Be You, and that can be found pretty much anywhere podcasts are found. I also co-hosted Queer Now with my friend Dave Giannini, which is also a little bit on hiatus as we're both kind of pursuing other projects, but the whole library is there for you.
It's great.
You can find, thank you. You can find that at Queer Now Pod, and also, again, anywhere you find your podcast. And yeah, M Night Frights, it's on the It Pod to Be You feed, so if you're interested in that, we go through every movie from The Sixth Sense up until Old. It's his genre movies we wanted to focus on, so that's a really fun listen as well. So yeah, those are the main places to find me.
Yeah, I like I said at the very beginning, Manish is a font of knowledge. Totally check out everything that he's working on, because it's all great. In fact, I listened to the episode on Old today, and boy, geez, I had just a wonderful time, because I watched that movie again last night, and it turns out I still love it. So
so good. It gets better and better, honestly.
Yeah, someone also pointed out that it's like kind of Cube-ish, and I was like, oh, it all clicks because I love Cube too.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, great. So check all that stuff out. As far as my plugs, you can find me on Twitter at LittleHorrorPHL. That username applies pretty much everywhere, including Letterboxd, Instagram, which I'm not really on that much, but you can check it out. There's sometimes things pop up on there, and yeah, the Patreon as well, where you can find all kinds of fun bonus episodes, and we're trying to get more commentaries in there as well, get episodes early, all kinds of fun perks, and it's just a couple bucks a month, and it really helps because boy, I put a lot of work into this podcast, and so if you want to support it out there, sign up for the Patreon, rate and review if you like the show. I always forget to plug the mailbag, and I'm not going to do that this time. So send in questions to bestlittlemaiLbag@gmail.com if you have questions that you want to ask me. Maybe you have also been arguing in your head with me, and you'd like that to not be in your head. Well, send in a question, and I'll argue with you on air. So, yeah, that's it for me. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.